My name is Father Michael, and I am a priest of presbyter, to use the formal term within the embrace of the Greek Orthodox Church. For 27 years, I have worn these vestments, the weight of them a familiar comfort, a reminder of the sacred duties I embraced upon my ordination, while the ancient office of Exorcist, as a distinct minor order, is largely a thing of the past, absorbed into the broader responsibilities of the priesthood. Certain among us are called to a more focused battle against the machinations of the adversary. By the grace of God and with the sanction of my bishop, I am one such priest, trained in the sacred rites of exorcism, a soldier on a spiritual battlefield as old as time itself. My life has been one steeped in the unwavering truths of our Orthodox faith, a faith that acknowledges the stark reality of evil not as an abstract concept, but as a personal, malevolent force embodied by Satan and his legions, fallen angels, once glorious, now dedicated to the perversion of God's creation and the enslavement of mankind. I have stood in the shadowed places where their influence congeals, armed with the cross of Christ, the prayers of the church, and a certainty that, in the end, God's light outshines all darkness. I have seen faces contorted by unholy rage, heard voices that should not issue from human throats, and felt the palpable chill of ancient malice. Each encounter, while harrowing, only served to reinforce the bedrock of my belief, the profound efficacy of our sacred traditions. My jurisdiction falls under the Metropolitan of Crete, and my service, until recently, had been marked by a solemn rhythm of liturgy, pastoral care, and these occasional, intense skirmishes with the demonic battles I always knew, with God's help, were winnable. The established doctrines of the Church, the wisdom of the Holy Fathers, these were my shield and my sword, and in them I found an unshakable confidence. Little did I know how fragile that confidence could be, how a single case could threaten to unravel not just my understanding, but the very fabric of what I believed to be true about the nature of evil. The call came on a Tuesday, the sky outside my small parish office in Heracleon a bruised purple with an impending storm. It was Bishop Gregorios himself. His voice, usually resonant with paternal warmth, was tight, strained in a way I had rarely heard. "Michael," he began, forgoing the usual pleasantries, "there is a situation, a grave one." He spoke of a young woman named Anna in a remote village nestled deep in the Lassithi Mountains, a place where old ways clung stubbornly to the stony soil. She was exhibiting signs of what the local priest, Father Elias, believed to be a severe demonic affliction. The details were sparse, relayed with a tremor in the young priest's voice that the bishop had clearly noted. It wasn't just the typical manifestations, the reviling of sacred objects, the unnatural strength, the blasphemies. Father Elias had spoken of an intelligence, a chilling, watchful presence that seemed to emanate from the girl, an unnatural stillness that was somehow more terrifying than any violent outburst. He had used the word wrong, a simple adjective that, in the context of demonic possession, carried an unnerving weight. Something about this case had deeply unsettled the local priest, a man who, while not trained in formal exorcism, would have been familiar with the spiritual struggles of his flock. The bishop's decision to call me directly, bypassing the usual channels through the dean, underscored the urgency and the unusual nature of the report. This wasn't just a troubled soul. This was something that had already begun to cast a shadow of profound fear. The remoteness of the village, usually a place of quiet pastoral beauty, now seemed to hint at an isolation where something truly alien could fester, far from the concentrated spiritual bulwark of more populous centers of faith. I packed my valise with the necessities my euchologian, the book containing the prayers and services of our church, including the potent prayers of exorcism by Saint Basil and Saint John Chrysostom, my pectoral cross, blessed and worn smooth by years of contact, a vial of holy water, and a small brass thurible with a supply of fragrant incense, the smoke of which is believed to repel demonic presences. The journey was long, the road winding ever higher into the mountains, the air growing colder, the landscape more desolate. By the time I reached the village of Cryavrisi, dusk was painting the sky in hues of ash and blood. place was unnervingly silent. No dogs barked. No children played in the narrow, cobbled streets. The very air felt heavy, imbued with a subtle, pervasive dread that settled deep in my bones, a palpable sense of wrongness that went beyond the expected gloom of a house touched by demonic influence. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath. Father Elias met me at the edge of the village, his face pale and drawn, his eyes darting nervously. He was a young man, barely 5 years ordained, and the terror etched on his features was stark. He led me to a small stone house, from which no light emanated, though I knew Anna's family was within. The family, her parents, and an older brother were huddled in the main room, their faces masks of exhaustion and a fear so profound it was almost a physical presence. They spoke in hushed whispers, their eyes fixed on the closed door to Anna's room. I vested the familiar ritual a small anchor in the rising tide of unease. Taking my cross in hand, I entered Anna's room. It was cold, a damp, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. A faint, unidentifiable odor hung in the darkness, something vaguely metallic and deeply unsettling. Anna lay on a simple bed, a young woman of perhaps 20 years, her dark hair splayed across the pillow, her face pale and still. Too still. I began the initial prayers, the words of the Trisagion flowing from my lips, a declaration of God's holiness. I sprinkled the room with holy water, its blessed drops hissing faintly as they touched the floor. I lit the incense, its fragrant smoke, usually a comfort, now seeming to recoil from the center of the room, swirling in agitated patterns. As my voice rose, invoking the power of the Holy Trinity, the flame of the single candle I had placed on a small table flickered erratically, casting dancing, distorted shadows. The air grew heavier, pressing in on me, and a profound silence fell, broken only by the cadence of my prayers and something else. A subtle, almost inaudible hum, a vibration that seemed to resonate not in my ears, but in the very marrow of my bones. It was not the reaction I expected. There was no immediate thrashing, no guttural curses. There was only this deepening stillness, this oppressive weight, and the growing sense that my sacred words were falling into a void, absorbed without resistance, without acknowledgement. This was not the typical defiance of a cornered demon. This was something different, something that felt anciently patient. I moved to the prayers of exorcism themselves, the powerful adjurations that have, for centuries, driven back the forces of darkness. The Lord rebukes you, O devil, I intoned, my voice firm, for he came into the world and dwelt among men in order to shatter your tyranny and free mankind. As the prayers intensified, Anna's eyes snapped open, but they were not her eyes. They were voids, black and depthless, reflecting no light. A voice issued from her lips, but it was not her voice, nor was it the cacophony of legion I had sometimes encountered. It was a single voice, impossibly ancient, calm, and chillingly articulate. It was devoid of any discernible emotion, yet it carried an immense weight of ages, of knowledge that should not be. You seek to command what you do not comprehend, little priest. The voice said, the words perfectly formed, the Greek archaic, almost pre-classical. It did not scream or blaspheme in the expected manner. Instead, it spoke of things that made my blood run cold, things for which my theological training had no framework. It alluded to epochs before the shaping of the cosmos, as I understood it, to powers that stirred in the unformed darkness before the divine fiat, let there be light. It spoke of whoever's of what was, and echoes from the silent beginning, concepts that had no place in the established demonology of fallen angels and their rebellion. Our understanding of demons posits them as created beings, angels who chose to fall. This voice hinted at an existence that predated such categories, something that was never part of God's angelic creation, perhaps something akin to the primordial forces that some ancient, non-Christian cosmologies described. Then it turned its attention to me. Michael Petrakis. It said, my full name, a name rarely used. You fear the silence of the tomb, the one you visited as a boy, the one where the small bones lay undisturbed. You carry the doubt of the unanswered prayer from the night your mother lay dying. These things are motes of dust in a vastness you cannot even begin to perceive. The knowledge was precise, intimate, terrifying, but it was not delivered as a taunt, not as a weapon to break my will. It was stated as a cold, detached fact, as if observing an insect under a lens, rendering my deepest, most private burdens utterly insignificant. My cross, held aloft, seemed to cause it no pain, no distress. The holy water I sprinkled towards Anna elicited only a slow blink of those abyssal eyes, a reaction that might have been curiosity. The power of the cross, the very symbol of Christ's victory over sin, death, and the devil, felt blunted, as if its divine frequency did not register with this entity, or registered in a way that was alien to its purpose. It was as if I were trying to repel a hurricane with a whisper. The first session, if it could even be called that, ended not with a climactic expulsion, nor with a raging battle of wills. It ended with Anna slumping back onto the pillow, her eyes closing, the voice falling silent. She appeared dormant, but the oppressive atmosphere in the room, in the house, in the very village, remained, perhaps even intensified, coiling like an unseen serpent. I was left profoundly shaken, drenched in a cold sweat, my hands trembling. It wasn't the fear of a demon, for I had faced their terror before. This was something far more insidious. This was the dawning, crushing realization that I was confronting something utterly unknown, something impossibly ancient, something against which my years of experience, my unwavering faith, and the accumulated wisdom of the church might be utterly, terrifyingly powerless. I retreated to Father Elias's small, sparse guest room, the prayers I tried to recite feeling hollow and brittle on my tongue. I stared at the crucifix on the wall, the image of our Lord's sacrifice, the ultimate symbol of hope and redemption. For the first time in my consecrated life, a sliver of a new kind of doubt pierced my soul, not a doubt in God, never that, but a doubt in my own, and perhaps even the church's, true comprehension of the full, terrifying scope of existence. The map of reality I had been given, the one that clearly demarcated the realms of God, man, and the adversary, suddenly felt incomplete. It was as if vast, dark continents, teeming with horrors yet unnamed, had been omitted. The words of the title the user had given this account echoed in my mind. A cold premonition. Something is terrible while you are orange. And the wrongness was not just in Anna, or in that room. It was beginning to seep into the very foundations of my world. The battle had barely begun, but I already sensed that the rules of engagement I had spent a lifetime mastering did not apply. I was an exorcist facing an enemy not found in any of our sacred texts, and the terror of that unknown was a chill far deeper than any demon had ever conjured. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Each time I closed my eyes, the image of Anna's depthless, black gaze seared itself onto the inside of my eyelids, and the calm, ancient voice echoed in the chambers of my mind, dissecting my deepest fears with chilling precision. The prayers I mumbled felt like dry leaves, crumbling in my mouth, their sacred power, once a torrent, now a choked trickle. The oppressive atmosphere I had felt upon entering the village of Cryavrisi had not lessened with the dawn. If anything, it had intensified, a suffocating blanket of dread that seemed to muffle the very sounds of the morning. Even the birds were silent. I spent the early hours poring over my euchologion, searching for any prayer, any obscure rite that might address an entity of this nature. The exorcisms of Saint Basil the Great and Saint John Chrysostom, powerful in time, tested, were designed to confront fallen angels, the Diabolos and his legions, beings who were part of God's creation, however corrupted. But the words spoken by the thing in Anna, its allusions to weavers of what was, and echoes from the silent beginning, resonated with nothing in our established demonology. These were not the boasts of a prideful demon claiming false divinity. They were statements of an existence that seemed to precede the very framework of our understanding of spiritual warfare. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I used Father Elias's sputtering telephone to contact Bishop Gregorios. His voice, when he finally answered, was already laced with anxiety. I recounted the events of the previous evening, my own voice strained as I relayed the entity's words. Its unnerving calm, its imperviousness to the initial rites. I described the black, lightless eyes and the profound sense of antiquity that emanated from it. A long silence followed my report. When the bishop finally spoke, his tone was grave, the earlier strain now mingled with a deep, resonant fear I had never heard from him. "Michael," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you speak of things that have no place. Are you certain? The strain, the isolation." "Your Eminence," I interrupted, a breach of protocol born of desperation. "I have faced the adversary's servants many times. This is other. It does not react as they do. It does not seem to be what they are." He instructed me to continue with the prescribed rites, to redouble my prayers, to anoint Anna with holy oil, and to trust in the power of Christ's church. Yet, beneath his words of reassurance, I sensed a profound disquiet, a fear that perhaps the spiritual armor of the church, so mighty against known foes, had encountered something for which it had no defense. He promised to consult certain ancient texts housed in the Patriarchate's library, texts rarely disturbed, but he cautioned me against speculation. "Stick to the canons, Father. Do not deviate," he warned, though his voice lacked its usual unwavering conviction. Father Elias, when I found him, was a shadow of his former self. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt, and he flinched at every unexpected sound. He confessed that he had barely slept, plagued by nightmares of crushing darkness and whispers in a language he did not understand, but which filled him with an abyssal terror. The wrongness was not confined to Anna's room. It was seeping into the very souls of those nearby. Steeling myself, I returned to Anna's bedside. The room was colder than before, the metallic scent more pronounced. Anna lay as still as death, but as I began the prayers of exorcism again, her eyes snapped open, those same terrifying voids. The little priest returns, the ancient voice intuned, a hint of something that might have been amusement, or perhaps just detached observation, coloring its archaic Greek. "Still waving your symbols, still chanting your incantations against what you cannot name. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, unclean spirit, to depart from this servant of God," I declared, my voice louder this time, more forceful, though a tremor of doubt ran beneath it. A sound, like the dry rustling of ancient parchment, seemed to issue from Anna's throat before the words formed. "Your Christ is a child of a later age. His power is known in the realms he shaped. But there are other realms, older realms. We were before the light you worship, before the rebellion you chronicle. We are the echoes of the first silence, the threads of what might have been." My blood ran cold. This was not a denial of Christ's divinity, but an assertion of a context so vast, so alien, that Christ's dominion, as I understood it, was but a single, albeit brilliant, star in an unthinkably ancient cosmos. "You are a liar, a deceiver," I cried, sprinkling holy water. It landed on Anna's skin, and this time, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, like heat haze over asphalt, rose from the droplets before they evaporated, leaving no mark. Not a hiss of pain, but a reaction. An interaction of energies I did not comprehend. "Truth is a constructed perspective, little priest," the entity replied, its voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless filled the room. "You speak of fallen angels, of a war in your heavens. Such squabbles are recent. We observed the shaping of galaxies, the birth of suns, while your kind were but unformed dust. We are not fallen, we are other." It then did something that shattered the last vestiges of my composure. Anna's head tilted at an unnatural angle, and the voice continued, "Your bishop seeks knowledge in his dusty scrolls. He will find whispers, fragments, warnings against looking too deeply into the spaces between the stars, into the silence before creation. He will find tales of the Proteron, the ones before. But he will not find a weapon against us there. Only fear, the knowledge of my call to the bishop, the specific mention of his search. It was as if this being was everywhere, its consciousness unbound by physical limitations. The fear it spoke of was not just the bishop's, it was mine, a cold serpent coiling in my gut. I pressed on with the prayers, my voice hoarse, my faith a flickering candle in a hurricane. The entity did not rage or writhe. Instead, the room itself seemed to react. The shadows in the corners deepened, coalescing, and the faint hum I had noticed before intensified, vibrating through my bones, making my teeth ache. A wave of profound nausea washed over me, and the words of the liturgy became jumbled in my mind. It felt as if the very air was resisting my prayers, pushing back against the sacred words. Then, Anna's lips curved into a slow, serene smile, a smile that was utterly alien on her pale face. "You tire, little priest. Your faith is a shield, yes, but even the strongest shield can be worn down by a tide that has flowed for aeons." Suddenly, a piercing shriek tore through the village. It was Father Elias. I rushed out, my heart pounding, to find him collapsed in the small hallway, clutching his head, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended sanity. "The walls," he gasped. They're breathing! The stones, they have faces!" I looked around wildly. The simple stone walls of the cottage seemed to ripple, to shift in my peripheral vision. The oppressive atmosphere was now a crushing weight, and a chorus of faint, sibilant whispers seemed to emanate from the very air around us. Too indistinct to understand, yet filled with an ancient, chilling malice. The wrongness was no longer contained within Anna, it was bleeding into reality itself. I helped the trembling Father Elias to a chair, his spiritual collapse almost complete. The entity in Anna was not just a possessor, it was a conduit, a focal point for something that was actively unmaking the familiar world around us. Desperation clawed at me. The established rites were failing. My understanding of the enemy was not just incomplete, it was fundamentally flawed. I found myself thinking of texts I had encountered in my early, more academic studies, apocryphal writings, Gnostic fragments, tales of beings and powers that the church had wisely, or perhaps fearfully, consigned to the shadows, knowledge deemed forbidden, not because it was necessarily false, but because it hinted at a reality too vast, too terrifying for the human soul to bear. Was this entity one of them? A being from outside the divine order, from the primordial chaos the Greek fathers had sometimes alluded to before God spoke light into existence? I returned to Anna's room, my euchologian hanging uselessly at my side. The entity watched me with those black, knowing eyes. "You begin to see?" it whispered, the serene, terrifying smile still playing on Anna's lips. "Your maps are incomplete. There are more shadows in the cosmos than your light can ever dispel." "What are you?" I asked, the question a raw plea from the depths of my shattered certainty. "We are our resonance," it replied after a long pause, as if searching for a word in a language too limited for its concepts. "A memory of the unshaped, and we are awakening. This world, it has become thin in places. The old barriers erode." It gestured vaguely with Anna's hand. "She is not the first, nor will she be the last. The gates, they are not as sealed as you believe." A gate. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. Not a demonic portal, but something older, something more fundamental. And it was opening. The room grew colder still. A fine layer of frost, impossible in the Cretan spring, began to form on the window pane. Anna's breathing became shallow, almost imperceptible. The entity's presence felt stronger, more anchored. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that this was no longer an exorcism. It was something else. A vigil, perhaps, at the edge of an abyss that was yawning wider with every passing moment. The rules of engagement had not just changed, they had been utterly annihilated. And as I stood there, a priest armed with faith against an ancient, cosmic tide, I understood that the terribly wrong was not just an affliction upon a young woman or a remote village. It was a crack in the foundations of the world, and I was staring directly into the encroaching darkness. The fight for Anna's soul was perhaps a mere prelude to a conflict far older and more terrifying than humanity could ever conceive. The days that followed blurred into a nightmarish tableau of escalating dread. The wrongness that had permeated Cryovrisi was no longer a subtle atmospheric pressure. It was an active, malevolent force. Livestock was found dead in the fields, their bodies unmarked but strangely desiccated. The villagers, once merely fearful, now exhibited a creeping paranoia, their eyes hollow, their whispers turning to accusations against one another. Father Elias was lost to me, confined to his bed, babbling incoherently about shifting geometries and eyes in the stone, his mind shattered by the glimpses of unreality he had perceived. The very fabric of the village, its social cohesion and its connection to the mundane world, was unraveling. Anna remained the epicenter. Her physical form was deteriorating rapidly, yet the entity within her, or perhaps through her, seemed to grow in presence. Its archaic voice now a constant, soft murmur in the cold room, even when her lips did not move. It spoke of patterns unwinding, of symphonies of uncreation, and of the great unraveling that was to come. My prayers, my sacred rites, felt like pebbles thrown against a tidal wave. The holy water evaporated with an almost audible sigh before it touched her skin, and the smoke from my thurible recoiled as if from an invisible barrier, refusing to approach the bed. The cross, the ultimate symbol of Christ's victory, elicited no pain, only that serene, ancient smile that promised an oblivion far older than salvation. Bishop Gregorius finally contacted me, his voice a fragile thread over the crackling line. The news was dire. The ancient texts he had consulted spoke not of demons in the way we understood them, but of archaic, primordial emanations, forces that existed before the divine fiat brought forth structured reality. They were described not as fallen angels, but as something akin to the raw, untamed energies of the pre-creation void, beings of immense power and alien consciousness that were never meant to interact with our ordered cosmos. The scrolls warned that to even name them was to invite their attention, and that the gates they spoke of were not physical portals, but rifts in the very essence of being, places where the veil between realities had worn thin. There are no rites of expulsion for such as these, Michael. The bishop had whispered, his voice heavy with despair. Only containment, perhaps, or sacrifice. The texts are fragmented, deliberately obscured. They speak of a kenotic echo, the self emptying to mirror the unmaking, but the cost. His voice trailed off, lost in static and unspoken fear. A kenotic echo, self-emptying. The words resonated with a terrifying clarity against the entity's pronouncements upon creation. Was this the forbidden knowledge, the terrible path hinted at? The thought was blasphemous, a perversion of Christ's own sacred kenosis, yet it lodged in my mind like a shard of ice. The entity in Anna seemed to sense the shift in my understanding. The little priest begins to grasp the edges of the tapestry. It murmured, Anna's eyes fixed on me with an unblinking, abyssal gaze. But the pattern is too vast for your threads of thought. I knew then that the traditional battle was lost. This was not about casting out a demon from a possessed soul. It was about confronting a tear in the world, a wound through which an ancient, unnameable vastness was bleeding. Anna was no longer just a victim. She was the anchor point, the conduit, and the gate was not something to be closed with prayers and holy water, but perhaps filled. A desperate, horrifying resolve began to form within me. If the church had no weapon against this, if God, in his inscrutable wisdom, permitted such ancient horrors to stir, then perhaps the only response was one of utter, terrifying surrender, not to the entity, but to the void it represented. A self emptying not to achieve holiness, but to become a counter-resonance, a nothingness to meet nothingness. I sent the remaining villagers away, those who could still comprehend, urging them to flee to Heraclion, to the bishop, to anywhere but this cursed place. I stayed with Anna, the silence of the abandoned village pressing in, broken only by the entity's soft, ceaseless monologue and the frantic beating of my own heart. I stopped praying the rites of exorcism. Instead, I sat by Anna's bed, my euchologian fallen to the floor, and I began to listen. Truly listen. Not to the words, for they were beyond my ultimate comprehension, but to the resonance beneath them, the ancient, cold vibration that hummed in the marrow of my bones. I let go of my theological frameworks, my certainties, my very identity as Father Michael, priest of the Orthodox Church. I emptied myself of doctrine, of hope, of fear itself, striving to become a hollow vessel. The entity paused in its murmuring. Anna's head tilted. You change, little priest. You unravel. There was a new note in its voice, something that might have been surprise, or perhaps the recognition of a kindred emptiness. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper. The metallic scent was overpowering. I felt a pulling sensation, as if my very essence was being drawn out, stretched thin. It was not painful, but it was terrifying in its totality. I was ceasing to be. My memories, my faith, myself all dissolving into a vast, indifferent silence. This was the kenotic echo, the terrible sacrifice. I was attempting to offer my own being, my soul, to seal the rift, to become the void that would absorb the encroaching uncreation. As the last vestiges of my individuality frayed, as the I became a distant echo, I saw Anna. Truly saw her, for the first time, beneath the alien presence. A flicker of her own spirit trapped, terrified. And in that final moment of fading consciousness, I directed the last spark of my will, not in command, but in a plea not to God, for he seemed impossibly distant from this primordial struggle, but to whatever remained of the human soul within the girl. Live. Then, there was only silence. A silence more profound than any I had ever known. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of being. I do not know how long I remained in that state, or what truly transpired. When awareness, or some fractured semblance of it, returned, it was to the weak light of dawn filtering through the grimy window. The room was still cold, but the oppressive atmosphere, the palpable wrongness, had lessened. It was not gone, but it was muted, as if a great storm had passed, leaving behind a devastated landscape and an unnerving quiet. Anna lay on the bed. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow, but it was her own. The black voids were gone. Her face, though gaunt and pale, was her own. The entity, the resonance, was absent. I stumbled out of the house, my body aching, my mind a fragile, cracked vessel. The village of Kryevrysi was deserted, silent as a tomb. The air still felt thin, the world somehow less solid than before. I had not defeated the ancient power. I knew that with a chilling certainty. It was too vast, too alien for defeat. But perhaps, in my own unmaking, I had somehow altered the resonance, plugged the gate with my own dissolving self, at least for a time. Bishop Gregorios found me wandering on the mountain road days later, a hollow-eyed man in tattered vestments, muttering about silent beginnings and echoes in the void. He never pressed me for details of those final hours. He saw the change in me, the pieces of my soul that were irretrievably lost. Anna recovered slowly. She had no memory of the entity, only of a profound darkness and a terrifying cold. She left Kryevrysi, never to return. The village itself remains abandoned, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a scar on the landscape where the world wore thin. I am no longer Father Michael, not in the way I once was. I still wear the robes, still perform the liturgy, but it is as if an echo myself, going through motions learned long ago. My faith remains, but it is a faith tempered by an abyss of unknowing, a faith that now acknowledges the terrifying vastness of the shadows that lie beyond our small, consecrated lights. The church continues, its ancient wisdom a bulwark against the known evils. But I know now that there are older, stranger horrors, things not accounted for in our sacred texts, things that stir in the primordial silence. Sometimes in the deep of night, when the world is still, I can feel it. A faint hum in my bones, a cold resonance from the silent beginning. The gate was not truly sealed. The unmaking was merely paused, and I, who touched that void, carry a piece of its silence within me, a constant chilling reminder that something is still terribly, fundamentally wrong with the world, and that the ancient echoes are only waiting for the barriers to thin once more. And I fear I am no longer a soldier of God against the darkness, but perhaps a part of the encroaching silence myself.